Your history, and if you look back at the conflict around World War II, we found ourselves being attacked, and we found ourselves thrusted into a war that we really didn't want to get into. But we had a mindset back then in World War II that this was for all the eggs, right? It was all on the table, and this was a war that had a clean-cut objective. And the objective was to absolutely decimate our enemies in Germany and the European theater and in Japan and the Pacific theater, to absolutely decimate their abilities to have any more military advantages, any more political clout or influence on the world table, and to bring them to an unconditional surrender, which means that they had nothing to say about the fact that they were surrendering. They were surrendering unconditionally, and then we had an objective to get out of those conflicted areas and help them rebuild and turn even their governments back towards a democracy type of state, and bringing them back into world operations and rebuilding them. And that's exactly what we accomplished, right? And it was bloody, it was hard, but it was a big war. But that's exactly what we accomplished. We brought those people to a table of unconditional terms of surrender. And then you fast forward and you come to the Vietnam conflict. And this was a war that we really didn't have clean objectives in. We didn't even really know why we were there. We started going in by just sending in advisors and instructors and aides, and then as some of those got killed, then we said, oh, now we're into this conflict because we're suffering casualties, and then we started sending troops over there. But we had no clean objective on how to win that thing, irrefutably, and an objective of getting out of there after we won. And so it became a very politicized campaign. It was one of the first campaigns that were televised. People lost the heart for war because every night on the news you were seeing casualties and you were seeing bombings and we were seeing all these crazy things. And so it was a real crazy thing. But you can see the difference between a war or a battle where there's a clean objective to fight to win. To fight to win, not just to fight to try to neutralize an area, but to fight to conquer, a fight to win, a fight to come out victorious on the other end. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to start a series called Fighting to Win, because you and I are in conflicts. You and I are in battles. You and I will experience these battles until the Lord calls us home. Now, the good thing is that the war has been won. Jesus won the war on the cross when he defeated sin and hell and the grave and Satan and all his cohorts, and he's got a clear-cut objective of an exit strategy because he's going to bring us home to heaven, right? And so we're happy about that. We're thrilled about that, but we're still living behind enemy lines right now. We're still living in a time of conflict, and even though the war has been won, you and I experience battles on a daily basis. Battles that attack our health, battles that attack our finances, battles that attack our relationships, battles that attack our inner being. We live in conflict. We live in a time and in a world where there's battles. Now, there's battles because we live in a world that is surrounded by a spiritual world, a spiritual realm. And the problem is that we can't observe the spirit realm, right? You can't put it under a microscope. You can't observe it through a telescope. You can't bring it into a laboratory and give it concrete tests and examinations that validate and prove that there's this spiritual world all around us. And yet, there is a spiritual world. We know that there's evil in the world, right? I mean, that's not debated. We understand it. We look at 9/11. We look at different things around the world, and we know that there's evil in this world, and that evil runs through the hearts of people, and people do vicious and horrible things from time to time. And so we understand there's evil, but there's this spirit world that's all around us, and sometimes people dabble in junk that they shouldn't, right? Things like channeling or seances or Ouija boards or tarot cards or anything like that bumps up against the spiritual world and can open up a whole world of hurt that people don't realize can happen as they open doors and allow things to begin to happen. And that's why God was very explicit in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 18. He says, "There shall not be found among you," these are among the people who are calling themselves followers of God. There shall not be among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through fire, who uses divination, who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer. He goes on in verse 11, one who casts spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. And the reason that God sets parameters and boundaries around these things is not, again, because he's trying to hide something from us, but because when we enter into or bump up against that spirit realm, we don't want what can happen. We don't want to get involved in what can come through that other side and what can begin to oppress us and attack us and even possess us if we dabble in this kind of stuff, because there's an enemy, right? And we know this when we turn to the scriptures again and again. We find things like in Isaiah 14 where it's talking about Satan, and it says, "How have you fallen from heaven?" And what I want you, I'm gonna pick out some verbs here, some action words here in the scripture. He goes, "How have you fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn? You have been cut down to earth." So we know that there's a spiritual realm around us. We can't see it, we can't observe it, but we know it's here, it's real. You have been cut down to earth, you who weaken the nations. Verse 13, "But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of the assemblies in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will make myself like the Most High God." So here we're seeing this expulsion. I have cast you out. You have been cut down to the earth, but there's this thing in your heart where you're saying, I will ascend again. I will be like God. And that's the very heart of pride. That's the very heart of this rebellion. That's the very heart of Satan. I will be like God. That's the temptation he gave to Adam and Eve. You will be like God, and that's why he's holding something back from you. He's selfish in being God, and he doesn't want you to be co-regents with him. And so there's this desire. I can call my own shots. I'm the captain of my fate, and all of this kind of stuff. And so look again where he's saying the enemy is, right? He's been cast down to the earth. Ezekiel 28, talking again about Satan, says, "You were the anointed cherub." That's an angel. You were an anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire, representing the angelic hosts. You were blameless in all your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. So a created being here, not anything that's in league with God, who's creator of all things. Verse 16, "By the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence. You sinned. Therefore, I have cast you." Here it is again. "I've cast you as profane from the mountain of God. I've destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. And I cast you to the ground. I put you before kings that they may see you." And so we're getting this idea that there was this, rebellion in heaven where Lucifer's heart was lifted up in pride, and he wanted the God stuff, and he wanted the accolades, and he wanted the praise and worship. And now he's being expelled, and he's thrown out of heaven, and he's thrown down to this earth. And Peter talks about this as well in 2 Peter chapter 2. He says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them into pits of darkness reserved for judgment." And again, that word that Peter uses here is really interesting because it's not even Hades, which we talked about in the book of Revelation. It's actually the word Tartaro or Tartarus, which is a place of confinement, a place of being locked away and preserved in chains of darkness. And when we went through the book of Revelation, we saw that at certain times in the end times, some of these spirit beings are released, and they come back upon the earth in this last days scenario that we went through in the book of Revelation. But here he's talking about they were being judged. Now, when you read the Bible and you read Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Boom, wonderful. Later on in Isaiah said that God did not create anything in vain or in chaos. But then when you go to Genesis 1, verse 2, it says, "And the earth was void." and darkness covered the face of the earth, and the waters covered the face. So there's a flood. From Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 1:2, there was a global flood. Most theologians believe that God created the entire universe. The psalmist said that the angels sang for joy when they watched God create an entire physical universe that was unknown to them because they're in a spiritual dimension, a more real dimension. God creates this whole physical realm, and then the enemy is rebelling at this time, and he is hurled down out of the entire universe to this one speck, this insignificant, in light of the entire universe, speck of dust called planet Earth. And as soon as he's thrown down to the earth is flooded. And a lot of these beings are brought down into Hades and into Tartarus, and they are held in committed to pits of darkness, reserved for a time of judgment. We know that this is real because when we go to the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "The Lord said to Satan, 'From where do you come?' And Satan answered the Lord, saying, 'From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it.'" And I was thinking, because I love hiking, and I'm like, dang, that's what he does, I mean, he's just hiking all over the place. He's just roaming around the earth, And so when he regains access to heaven, and how did he regain access to heaven? By usurping man's authority through the fall of man. Because God gave man all the authority over the works of his hands, even up to back into heaven. And so now Satan can appear before God among the angelic hosts in heaven. And so he says, where are you coming from? Now, obviously, God's omnipotent. He knows all things. He's omniscient. He knows he's just trying to remind the devil, like, hey, where are you coming from, pal? Like, you don't belong up here, but where are you coming from? And he says, I come from walking around on the earth because that's where I've been expelled. That's where you have banished me. And that's my domain. I'm down there on planet Earth. And then God pulls a fast one. And God creates man and woman in his image, a species that has never existed in time and eternity up until this point, created in the image of God, and crowned with authority, crowned with dominion, given rights over all the works of God's hands, the very thing that he wanted. So here he is banished to this little planet, and on this little planet, God creates humanity and gives them what he wanted, which was total authority over all of the works of God's hands, all of creation. Don't you think that was insulting? Don't you think that really got him angry and began to create even more rage in this being's heart? And Jesus, talking about this event in Luke chapter 10, verse 18, said, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Because Jesus is the eternal I am as well. And he says, I was back there. I was back there at the dawn of creation. And I saw the rebellion. And I saw him cast from heaven like lightning down to this earth. And so one of the things that we have to wrap our minds around is that this is not a playground. This is a battleground. And you and I are in battles. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't enjoy the good things that God has, but I think as Americans in 21st century American culture, we enjoy the world maybe a little too much. And we don't recognize the threat of the fact that we are still in battles. The war has been won, but we experience battles. As a matter of fact, Paul calls the devil the god of this world. That has not changed. All right, he's still forcing his will. He works through the children of disobedience, the Bible says, those people that will allow him to corrupt and pervert his heart, and then becomes a missionary, an emissary of Satan's kingdom and Satan's ways. It's horrible when we look at the things that people do to people. And then we come to the Bible, and the Bible gives us these real life instances that become metaphors and illustrations of this bigger picture of what's going on in this battle that you and I are in. And one of them is the story of King Jehoshaphat. And I think you know the story of King Jehoshaphat found in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Jehoshaphat is king over Judea, and all of a sudden he wakes up one morning, and lo and behold, there's 3 other armies that had formed a confederacy, and they've grouped together, and they're coming down to wipe out Jerusalem. And it creates a huge problem. And they don't know what to do, and they begin to fast, they begin to pray, they begin to cry out to God for guidance and for help and everything, because of what was going on. And God's Spirit gets hold of a prophet, and the prophet says this in verse 15. He said, "Listen, all Judea, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and King Jehoshaphat. Thus says the Lord to you, do not fear, do not be dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but the Lord's." The war has been won, but you and I are in battles. And Jehoshaphat finds himself in this huge battle. These enemies, this anti-Semitic spirit that's in these other people, the Moabites and all these other nations that are coming against Israel, is just a microcosm of the enemy's hatred towards the things of God. And so God is stepping in the scene through the prophet and saying, listen, if you'll learn to fight the way I want you to fight, if you'll learn to fight the way I want to teach you how to fight, then even the battles aren't yours. The war wasn't yours. He won the war on his own. We were helpless. We were enemies of God. We didn't stand a chance. We were, already basically defeated, but he won the war on the cross. Disarmed rulers and authorities, made an open spectacle of. But he's saying that even the battles, if you will learn what I want to teach you, even the battles can be the Lord's. Because let's face it, the Bible says that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against powers and principalities and rulers of this darkness in this world. Even Peter said that the enemy goes about like a roaring lion seeking whom he might devour. And so this is happening I heard one preacher once say, as far as the trials and tribulations and battles that we experience, he said, imagine yourself in your car. He says, you are right now either in the middle of a battle, or you are looking in your rearview mirror of a battle you just came out of, or you're driving into a battle. But there's never a long period of neutrality where you just go through life and I'm living large. We're always experiencing conflicts. We're always experiencing tribulations, trials, and battles. We fight these battles that are always coming against us because there is an enemy that's there. And we're going to come back to this next week and look a little bit more intently at Jehoshaphat and what happens here. But I want to look at another illustration here in Genesis 50, verse 20. And this is talking about Joseph. And you know the story of Joseph, right? Joseph is one of the 12 sons of Jacob, becomes Israel. And Joseph is sold by his brothers into slavery because they're jealous of him. He ends up into Egypt, in a prison in Egypt, comes out of the prison by the hand of God, is exalted to second in command of all of Egypt, only under Pharaoh himself. And through this ends up preserving and saving the clans of Israel through a great famine and through the provisions that he's provided in Egypt. And so when his brothers finally come to him and they're making amends because they think, our dad's died, Jacob died, and now Joseph is going to, he's going to get his pound of flesh here. And Joseph responds to this, as for you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to preserve many people alive. And this is something I want you to see. The enemy always means it for evil. He comes to steal and kill and destroy. You're created in the image of God, and he is in a blind rage against anything that represents God or stands for the things of God. And he's got devices and plans that he plans against you and against your life. Assignments against you and against your life. But if we can learn some things, we can find out that even though he means things for evil, God means things for good. God will literally use the traps of the enemy, the battles of the enemy, to turn them out for good. Now, only God can do that. Only God can do that and turn, hardship, ashes into beauty. And so, you might be here saying, well, I'm addicted to something, and it's such a battle. I feel like I'm sinking. My faith is cold. My heart is hard. I'm burned out. I really, I'm failing at this thing called life. What's happening to me? Why bother? What's the point? Why should I go on? Because the battles are wearing you down. The battles are introducing stress into your life, and stress literally shuts you down, wears you, literally restricts the blood flow to your capillaries and makes you tired, less attentive, less attention span, less focus, less creativity, all that kind of stuff. But God's got a promise that he talks about in Isaiah 61. He says, to grant those who mourn in Zion, giving them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of the spirit of fainting, so that they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified. He says to give them a mantle of praise. And when we think of mantle, again, remember the scriptures interpret the scriptures. And where else do we see this thing about a mantle? Well, Joseph received a mantle in the coat of many colors. That favor was on his life. That's why his brothers got jealous. We see the mantle on John the Baptist that was significant of a prophet. But especially we see the mantle on Elijah. Right? Elijah had a mantle on him that signified him being a servant of God, a prophet of God. He used that in some of his miracles. And then when he was translated and caught up into heaven, Elisha wanted a double portion. And Elijah said, if you see me go up, you'll have what you want. And he saw him go up, and his mantle fell to the ground. And the first thing he does is he rolls up the mantle, he goes to the Jordan River, and he strikes it, and he says, where is the God of Elijah? And the water separates, and he goes across. And all the other prophets are like, holy smokes, right? Like holy cow, like holy mantle. I mean, holy something. It's like, wow, this is really mind-blowing. And so there's this mantle, and he says he wants to give us a mantle, something that signifies that we have authority, something that signifies that we have favor, something that signifies that we have a position and a place in God that cannot be taken away. That's irrefutable. And he says, I want to give you this mantle called praise. For the spirit of heaviness. Because we get heavy under these battles. And he says, I want to give you the importance of praise and worship. Because listen, praise and worship becomes the key that can literally change your battles. If you want to fight to win, now if you want to just, whatever, I'm just going to blow through life like a leaf in the wind, that's your prerogative. But if you want to fight to win, if you want to be successful, if you want to have victories in your battles, he's saying, here's the key. Here's the key. And it is going to be all about praise and worship and what that means. And how that activates the things of God. Because see, God says, I've already won the war. I've already won the war. And so the rest is on your shoulders. And he does that because either we say, okay, well, I got to live life on my own, or we learn the secret of turning back to him, in which case, as he told Jehoshaphat, now even the battles will become the battle of the Lord. They're not your battle. They're his battles. And he will change the course of battles. He will bring significance into the course of your battles. So, I'm going to shift gears. That was all kind of like just introductory to where I want to go today. But don't worry, it's not going to take long. I want to talk about Esther. And I want to give you a homework assignment to read the book of Esther. I read it last night before I fell asleep, probably 8 to 10 minutes it takes to read the book of Esther. So Esther's a story of a king whose wife defies him publicly and brings shame. And so it starts the search for another queen, the replacement of the queen that's dishonoring the king. And there's a cast of characters, and I'm just going to go over them really quick. There's King Ahasuerus, who is the king over the Medo-Persian Empire, which stretched from all of India all the way through the Mesopotamian area, all the way into Turkey. This was a vast, huge empire. And he's the king over all of that. His queen, Queen Vashti. And then introducing Esther. Esther is a Jewish girl who's going to become the replacement for Queen Vashti, who's now being dethroned. And Esther is the cousin and adopted daughter of Mordecai. And then there's Mordecai, and then there's a character by the name of Haman. And Haman is typical of the enemy. He's typical of the nature of Satan in this whole thing because of the anti-Semitic spirit that's coming across. So Haman is a big deal. Haman is in the king's court. He's got certain privileges and rights and responsibilities. He's literally over the legal affairs of the kingdom and law enforcement and this kind of stuff. But he's filled with pride, and he really kind of demands and expects everybody to bow before him and pay homage. You know, like you just bow before, this is a dignitary and you're showing respect. But Mordecai is a Jew, and he's not going to bow before anybody but his God. And so we pick up the story in Esther chapter 3, verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, he was filled with rage. When Satan realizes that there are people who will not play his game and who will break away to serve the living God, he is filled with rage towards you. Because he wants that attention. He wants that worship, right? What was one of the temptations of Jesus when he had been fasting for 40 days? Bow down and worship me, and I will give you the kingdoms of the earth, for they're mine to give to whomever I want. The very things that Jesus wanted, the kingdoms of the earth, which he regains in the book of Revelation, but he didn't do it by self-promotion. He did it by humility, by going to the cross before the crown, but now he's got the crown. And he goes on in verse 6, it says, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. So he wants to just forget just Haman. He's going to wipe them all out. I can't stand these people. And so we have Vashti refusing to honor the king and come out to his big feast. He's king over 127 provinces. Huge. And he throws a party for 180 days. This guy knows how to throw a party. 180-day long party. Right? And towards the end of it, he wants to bring his queen out because she's beautiful and he wants to display her. And she says, no. So he calls the council of the wise men and they say, give her the bump. Let's bring somebody new in the block because this is not a good thing. And so they look for another queen. And Esther is beautiful. But she has more than an exterior beauty. She has something inside. She has a confidence. She has a humility, and she's got a courage. She's got the whole package. And as soon as they go through this whole rigmarole of all these girls trying out, this is bigger than Miss Universe. This is going to be Miss Persia, and she's going to become queen. And so she's got this beauty, which we'd say, what a blessing. But she's going to find herself being hitched to this despot pagan king. What a curse. She's not going to be able to be a Jewish girl who will marry a Jewish guy and carry on the Jewish lineage. She's going to lose all of that. She's going to lose all of that significance of being Jewish because she's going to be marrying this despot king. And so oh my goodness, she goes from being really blessed that she's really beautiful to being cursed that she's got to do this. And it causes us to say, why do bad things happen? Why do bad things happen sometimes to good people? And here's something. Don't waste your pain. Don't internalize it. Don't become bitter. Don't become a victim, because we all live on the same planet. We all get kicked to the curb. We all have hard times. Don't waste your pain. Give it to him and let him use it for his glory. I've seen people on both sides of the spectrum. I've seen people who've been in pain and hardship, and I don't deny that, but they internalize it, they become a victim, poor me, and they become immobilized. I've seen people who have given it back to God, and God has blessed their life and used them in profound ways. And so this decree goes out, and they can't change their laws. This is the law of the Medes and Persians. You cannot change a law after it's been instituted. That's just one of their laws. And so this is what's happening. Satan plans to steal, kill, and destroy. Listen, the church is not a cruise ship. I've been on a cruise. They pamper you, right? Even your towels become little animals. Just give me a towel. I'd be fine with that, but no, it's a little monkey today. It's a little parrot today. I mean, and they spoil you with food. Dear Lord. They have mountains of hamburgers 24/7. That was very detrimental to me. That was just, but the church is not a cruise ship. The church is a hospital ship. And sometimes we just think, well, I didn't like the music today, and well, that piano was too loud, or pastor's message wasn't right on today, or somebody didn't greet me properly. They kind of just walked right by me and didn't. Oh, listen, freaking grow up. Right? This is not a cruise ship. We're not here to pamper you. We're here to rescue the lost. This has got a great big red cross on it, a big cross of Calvary, and we're trying to rescue the lost. So this goes on. Mordecai gets an invitation. Now he's an attendant. Mordecai is an attendant to the court, and Haman doesn't know that Esther's a Jew. She's just become the queen. He's just issued a verdict to kill all the Jews. She finds out about it, and she has a dinner and invites only the king and only Haman. And she goes there, and she just toots his horn. Man, you're all that in a slice of bread. So in chapter 5, verse 11, it says, Haman recounted to them, he goes back to his wife and his friends, and he recounted to them the glory of his riches, the number of his sons. He's got 10 sons. Every instance where the king had magnified him and how he had promoted him above the princes and the servants of the king. And Haman also said, even Esther, the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet which she had prepared. And tomorrow also I'm invited by her with the king. Yet all this does not satisfy me, because every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate, I'm so filled with rage and jealousy that pompous jerk won't bow down and pay homage to me. That even though all of these blessings, this is where unforgiveness blinds us to the things that God's doing in our lives. All of a sudden we miss all the things that are good, and we just can't let go of one thing or a person. And so he goes back and he starts telling them all these things that are happening. Now, there's a coincidence that takes place in the book of Esther, if you believe in coincidences, where one night the king can't sleep. You ever have one of those? Don't worry, the older you get, the more you'll have those. And so all of a sudden, he can't sleep. So what does he do? He calls for one of the king's record keepers to come in and read some records, because nothing makes you fall asleep more than going over minutes of a business meeting, right? We have to do it once a month, and I read the minutes and watch the eyes of the deacons glaze over, because it's like, oh, there's nothing, So he's thinking, hey, bring me some business meeting minutes, read them to me, and I'll be out like a light. So they start reading, and all of a sudden, they read the story of Mordecai uncovering a plot to kill Ahasuerus. 2 eunuchs had gotten together, and they said, let's wipe him out, let's kill him. And so Mordecai warned Esther, warned the king. The king discovered the plot. The 2 eunuchs were killed. They were hung on the gallows, and the king's life was saved. And as they read this account of what happened, the king goes, hey, what did we ever do to thank that guy? And the guy's like, there's nothing in the record. There was no acknowledgement of thanks or reward or anything for that. And so this sets in the king's mind and starts a plan going. So God always knows what you do in secret. God watches what you do. That's why, Nehemiah prayer, remember me for good, O Lord. He always remembers. And we need to pray that prayer a lot more. Remember me for good, Lord. I'm going to do something I don't necessarily want to do, but I'm going to do it for you and remember me for good. The other day I was talking to my son, Tim, and out of the blue, and now I've been blessed. You can't be a pastor without having memory loss. I'm just telling you the way it is. You can't. You'd be filled with too much hurt and pain and regret and animosity. So I forget things. So Tim was saying, hey, Dad, you remember the Christmas where you and Mom had a homeless guy come to our house, and we bought him Christmas gifts, and we gave him food, and we just had him over that whole day? And I'm like, what? Like totally gone. He goes, yeah, don't you remember? And then I kind of started, he goes, that was amazing. He said, I have never forgotten that. You never know what you're doing, how it impacts the lives of others. And now, even though I had forgotten about it, God never forgot about it, right? So The Bible even says that. God is not unjust to forget your works and the love which you have shown towards his name in having ministered and still minister to all the saints. God never forgets things. We might forget things. God's not going to forget. The king might have forgotten something here. God didn't forget it. And at the right time, God brings it back to his memory to where he's going to say, what are we going to do about this? So we go back, Esther 5, verse 17. Then Zereth, now Zereth is the wife of Haman. Zereth, his wife, says, and all his friends said to him, have gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hang on it, and then go joyfully to the king's banquet. And the advice pleased Haman, and so he had the gallows made. So he's blinded out of rage and jealousy and hatred towards Mordecai, and he's like, all the blessings in my life, I just can't even enjoy him because this jerk is still here before me. And they said, just hang him. Just get rid of him. And he's like, no kidding, that's what I'll do. And then they said, then go enjoy the banquet. And he's like, awesome. So all I have to do is take out revenge. I'm going to go ask king. I'm going to get the king's permission to kill him. So, chapter 6. The king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace in order to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows which he had prepared for him. So all of a sudden you're seeing two plans starting to converge on one another. You're starting to see the plan of Mordecai and you're starting to see the plan of God. There's always two plans that are going on. There's always things that are going on. And so they're starting to come in conflict. Verse 5 says, the king's servant said to him, behold, Haman is standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and he said and the king said to him, what is to be done for the man whom the king desires to honor? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? Like, dude, he's going to honor somebody. It's got to be me. Like, I'm the principal candidate here, you know, I win this one. And so verse 7, Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king desires to honor, let him bring a royal robe which the king has worn, the horse on which the king had ridden, and whose head a royal crown has been placed. Wow. Wow. Be careful of wanting another person's positions or giftings or blessings. They're not for you. This is exactly an illustration of Satan. I will be like God. Let me just feel that robe. Let me just ride on that horse of authority. Let me just feel the weight of the crown on them. Because, man, I just think that that's what I was made for. Wow. Wow. Scary, scary, scary. And it goes on. Verse 9. And let the robe and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble princes, and let them array the man whom the king desires to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. He's setting himself up great. But here comes the curveball. The king said to Haman, quick, take the robes and the horse, all you have said, and do so to Mordecai, the Jew, who is sitting in the king's gate. Do not fall short in anything that you have said, hung by the tongue. The words of his mouth come back to ensnare him. And now he's doing to Mordecai, his hated enemy and rival in his own mind, what he wanted done to him, and parade him around everywhere. Listen, when God determines to bless you, nothing can stop it. Nothing can stop it. God is so good. The blessings of God. If God be for you, who can be against you? Yes, Satan has plans against you. Satan has devices and schemes and desires against you. But God's got plans for you as well. Jeremiah says this in Jeremiah 29, verse 11. God says this, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans of welfare, not of calamity, to give you a future and to give you a hope. God's devised plans for your life and blessings for your life. Oh, the enemy's scheming and the enemy's whipping up these great ideas and these big concoctions. He's going to come and he's going to steal, and he's going to kill, he's going to destroy. He's going to enter you into these battles, and you're going to get into these little battles, and they're never going to stop. Somebody's going to stick you in the back. Somebody's going to move over you in a promotion. Somebody's going to, and we find ourselves in these conflicts. And the enemy wants to take those way further than they really should go, because a lot of it is up here. This is where it was with Haman. Mordecai never did anything to him, didn't toot his horn as much as he wanted, right? But it was all up here. I hate this guy. I'm going to kill this guy. And the battle sometimes can take us in our minds further, because the battle becomes up here. And so Esther calls for another banquet. Chapter 8, verse 1. On that day, Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther, and Mordecai came in before the king, for Esther had disclosed what he was to her. So she has another banquet. Haman comes in again, and in the middle of the banquet, she pulls the blinders off everyone's eyes, and she says, King, this guy's a jerk. And the king orders that he be hung on his own gallows, and that the ring he wore of significance and of rank and honor goes to Mordecai, and everything is placed on his hands. And then verse 2 says, the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over all the house of Haman. Everything he wanted now goes to Mordecai. You see, you know what Satan wants? Satan wants the glory. Satan wants all of God's creation. But guess what? He's given it to you and I. He's given it to us. We're going to reign with him over creation. That's why we have to create a higher value of the importance of our life. Our life is not just being squandered down here, making a living so I can barely live, and that's what it's all about. And I'm going to take really hellacious vacations and just, try to enjoy as much out of this sucky life that I can. That's not what it's about. It's about creating an entire higher value of why I exist in the first place and what God is really going to do for me. All of creation. In verse 8, it goes on in verse 11. In them, the king granted to the Jews who are in each and every city the right to assemble and defend their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the entire army or any people of province who might attack them, including children, women, and to plunder their spoil. So this decree that went out that cannot be retracted, that you can kill a Jew and take their plunder, the king undercuts it. He can't retract it, but he undercuts it by sending out another decree saying if you're a Jew, before that happens, you can defend yourself. Second Amendment right there. Where does it come from? From the Word of God. You have a right to defend yourself and your property. And they did. And they actually ended up killing about 75,000 people in the king's province. And it was a great victory. And verse 16 says, for all the Jews there was light and gladness and joy and honor in each and every province and each and every city where the king's commandment and his decree arrived. There was gladness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a holiday. Many among the people of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. There's an evangelistic note that happens in this. A lot of the other people want to become Jews now. They want to become followers of this God who's working in their lives and who's doing things. See, when it was over, it was good. When they were going through it, not so good. Which tells us that everything you go through is temporary. You're on top of the mountains and everything's going great. Trust me, it's temporary. You are in the pit, in the fiery furnace, and drowning despair, and the world is closing in over you. Trust me, it's temporary. It's ups and downs the whole way through. You better get used to it. It's what it's going to be. It's ups and downs. But God will pull you out of the downs. God will fight your battles for you. This is one of the biggest things that needs to be articulated, declared, screamed at to people contemplating suicide. Where you are right now is not where you will always be. That's why they kill themselves. They have no hope. They see no exit strategy. I'm here. I might as well just die, because dying is better than living in this pit. And we need to tell them that where you are is temporary. It's a season. Trust me, it will get better. And we need to gear ourselves. I see we got a generation of young people that don't have backbone to live this thing called life. because they get offended, and then they become victims, and they don't know what to do because who wants to be a victim? There's no value or virtue in being a victim. And we got to instill in them that mettle and that backbone that this is what life is about. Yes, it's hard. Yes, there are battles, but God will fight those battles for you. Chapter 10, verse 3. For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and in favor with his many kinsmen, one who sought the good of his people and who spoke for the welfare of the whole nation. Wow. Wow. He's a good leader. That line right there, who seeks the welfare of the nation, should be the lens you look through when you vote. Who's in it for the people? Who's in it for me? Right? So listen, you're going to go through battles. You're going to have heartache. You're going to have hardship. Don't give up. The Bible says, stand still and know that I am God. Be still. And that means more than just stopping. It means like releasing. Let it go. Isn't that a song somewhere in Disney? Come on, Tammy, help me out. Let it go. Right? Let it go. Stop trying to figure it all out. You're not going to figure it all out. You're not going to wrap your mind around why did this happen. Give it to God and you'll find out why it happened. You'll find out why he can use that. The battles will belong to the Lord. Here, and I want to end with this, is one of the biggest traps of the enemy. When we find ourselves in the fiery furnace, when we find ourselves in the battle, as Israel found themselves as captives in Babylon, and they said this, how can we sing the Lord's songs in a foreign land? How can we sing the Lord's songs in a foreign land? You better learn how, because it is the secret to fighting to win. You're going to fight anyway. You're going to have fights anyway. So do you want to fight for no reason and no purpose and just wear yourself down, or do you want to fight to win? How can we sing the Lord's songs in a foreign land? How can we do that? Well, the answer is you make yourself do it. You make yourself sing the Lord's songs, because no matter what your circumstances are, he is still above the clouds where it's always sun shining. His character never changes. His attributes never change. He is always God. Therefore, by virtue of being always God, he is always worthy, regardless of how you feel about it. Because we don't live by our feelings. Right? We don't deny our feelings. We just don't live by them. We live by faith. Cheryl,